Maya Johnson stepped into Westfield Mall with a smile on her face. Today was special. Her mother's birthday was just 2 days away, and she wanted to find the perfect gift. At 16, Maya was one of the top students at Lincoln Academy. She had saved up money from tutoring younger kids after school for 3 months to buy something nice. The mall was busy that Saturday afternoon. Maya adjusted her school backpack and checked the time on her phone. She had 2 hours before she needed to head home for dinner. Her dark curly hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she still wore her school uniform, a crisp white blouse and navy blue skirt. Maya always felt proud wearing it, as it represented all her hard work to earn a scholarship at the prestigious school. She walked into Harrington's, the fanciest department store in the mall. The perfume section might have something her mother would like. Judge Katherine Johnson worked long hours at the district court and rarely bought nice things for herself. Maya wanted to surprise her with something special. As Maya browsed through the glass counters, she noticed a security guard watching her. At first, she didn't think much of it, but when she moved to the accessories section, the man followed, staying about 20 feet behind her. Maya felt uncomfortable but continued shopping. She was used to this kind of attention in expensive stores. Maybe the silk scarf section, she muttered to herself. Her mother often admired scarves in magazine ads but would never spend money on them herself. Maya found a beautiful blue patterned scarf that reminded her of her mother's favorite painting at home. She carefully lifted it from the display to check the price tag. $98, almost exactly what she had saved. Perfect. As she held the scarf, admiring how the light caught the silk threads, Maya noticed a white woman across the aisle pick up a similar scarf, examine it, and then place it in her shopping bag without any store employees approaching her. Maya was still looking at the price tag when a firm hand gripped her shoulder. "Miss, I need you to come with me," a deep voice said. Maya turned to see a tall police officer looking down at her with cold eyes. A second officer stood behind him, hand resting on his belt. "Excuse me?" Maya asked, confused. "Is something wrong?" "We've received a report about shoplifting," the first officer, whose name tag read Wilson, said loudly. Several shoppers turned to stare. "Shoplifting? But I haven't bought anything yet. I was just looking at this scarf for my mother," Maya explained, holding up the scarf still in her hand. "Sure you were," the second officer, Mercer, said with a smirk. "We've heard that before." Maya's heart began to race. "I don't understand. I didn't take anything." Officer Wilson nodded toward her school backpack. "Then you won't mind if we take a look in there?" People were watching now. Maya felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Right here? I haven't done anything wrong," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "That's not for you to decide," Officer Wilson replied. "Now, are you going to cooperate, or are we going to have a problem?" Maya looked around for help. The store clerk who had been watching her earlier now stood beside the security guard, both observing from a distance. The white woman with the scarf had disappeared. "I'll cooperate," Maya said quietly, "but I didn't steal anything." Officer Mercer laughed. "They never do." Maya didn't know it yet, but this shopping trip was about to change her life forever. "Empty your backpack on the counter," Officer Wilson commanded, pointing to a glass jewelry display. His voice was loud enough that everyone nearby could hear. Maya's hands trembled as she unzipped her backpack. Inside were her school textbooks, a calculator, her lunch container, and a small wallet with $103, her savings for her mother's gift. She carefully removed each item and placed them on the counter. "See, there's nothing here that doesn't belong to me," Maya said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. Officer Mercer picked up her wallet and opened it. "Where'd you get this kind of money? That's a lot of cash for a kid like you." Maya felt a flash of anger at his assumption but kept her composure. "I've been tutoring after school for 3 months to save up for my mother's birthday present." "Tutoring, huh?" Officer Wilson laughed and exchanged a look with Mercer. "And who exactly are you tutoring?" "Math lessons behind the school." Several shoppers had stopped to watch. Some were filming with their phones. Maya felt hot tears threatening to form but blinked them back. She would not cry. "I tutor middle school students in algebra and science, on top of my class at Lincoln Academy." Maya pointed to her school uniform. "You can call the school to verify." The store manager approached now, a middle-aged man in a suit who kept his distance as if Maya might steal something from him too. "Officers, we have security footage if you need to review it," he offered, though his tone suggested he had already decided Maya was guilty. "That would be helpful," Maya said quickly. "The cameras will show I didn't take anything." "We'll get to that," Officer Wilson said dismissively. "First, turn out your pockets." Maya did as instructed. Nothing but her phone and a hair tie. "Where's the scarf?" Mercer demanded. "What scarf?" "I was looking at one to buy for my mother, but I didn't take it. It's probably still where I left it," Maya explained, pointing to the display she had been browsing. A store employee whispered something to the manager, who nodded. "Officers, we can't seem to locate the blue silk scarf that was on display. The inventory shows we should have 3, but we can only find 2. Maya felt sick. "That's impossible. I put it back right there." She pointed again to the display. "Maybe you should check the white lady who was shopping there before the police came," a voice called out from the small crowd of onlookers. "She put a scarf in her bag." Officer Wilson turned toward the voice. "Ma'am, please don't interfere with police business." An older black woman stepped forward. "I saw the whole thing. This young lady never put anything in her bag, but the blonde woman in the red coat did." "We'll handle this, ma'am," Mercer said firmly. "Please step back." The woman didn't move. "I'm not going anywhere. This child is being harassed for no reason." Maya felt grateful but also more frightened. The situation was spinning out of control. "Look," Maya said, trying to stay calm, "I just want to call my mother. She can clear this up." "You'll get your phone call at the station," Wilson replied, pulling out his handcuffs. "Turn around, hands behind your back." "You're arresting me? For what?" Maya's voice finally broke. "I didn't steal anything." "Interfering with an investigation, possible theft, and now causing a public disturbance," Mercer listed off, seeming almost pleased. As Wilson moved toward her with the handcuffs, Maya made one last plea. "Please, just check the security footage first." "We don't need to check anything," Wilson said, grabbing her wrist. "We know what we saw." The cold metal closed around Maya's wrists, and in that moment, she realized this was never about a missing scarf at all. The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into Maya's wrists as Officer Wilson led her through the department store. Shoppers stopped to stare. Some whispered behind their hands, while others openly pointed. Maya kept her eyes on the floor, unable to bear the shame of being paraded like a criminal. "Head up, keep moving," Officer Wilson commanded, gripping her arm tightly enough to leave marks. They walked past the perfume counter where Maya had first entered the store just 20 minutes earlier. The saleswoman who had smiled at her then now looked away, pretending to organize bottles that were already perfectly aligned. "Please," Maya whispered to Officer Mercer, who walked on her other side. "This is a mistake. I didn't take anything." "Save it for the station," Mercer replied loudly. "We've heard every excuse in the book." An elderly woman shopping for globes frowned at the officers. "Is that really necessary? She's just a child." "Ma'am, please step back. This is police business," Wilson answered without slowing down. As they reached the main mall corridor, the humiliation intensified. Saturday afternoon meant the mall was packed with teenagers, families, and shoppers of all ages. Maya recognized 2 girls from her math class standing outside a shoe store. Their eyes widened in shock when they saw her in handcuffs. "Oh my God, is that Maya Johnson?" one whispered loudly. "What did she do?" the other asked, already pulling out her phone. Maya wanted to disappear. Her perfect record, her reputation as a responsible student. Everything she had worked for was crumbling before her eyes. And for what? A scarf she had never even touched except to look at its price tag. Officer Wilson seemed to walk her through the busiest sections intentionally, taking a route that passed the food court where dozens of people sat eating. Many stopped mid-bite to watch the procession. "These kids think they can just take whatever they want," Wilson said to Mercer, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Then they act surprised when there are consequences." "Always the same story," Mercer agreed with a smirk. "Never done anything wrong in their lives." Maya bit her lip to keep from crying. She would not give them the satisfaction. They'd finally reached the mall security office, a small room with gray walls and harsh fluorescent lighting. Inside, a security guard sat behind a desk covered with monitors showing different areas of the mall. The officers pushed Maya into a metal chair in the corner. "We caught this one stealing a scarf from Harrington's," Wilson informed the guard. "Nearly $100 item." The guard barely looked up. "The usual paperwork is in the drawer." Maya found her voice. "I didn't steal anything. The security cameras will prove it if you just look." Wilson ignored her, turning to Mercer. "Search her bag again. She might have hidden it somewhere we didn't check." For the second time, they emptied her backpack, this time more roughly. Her carefully organized notes scattered across the floor. One of the officers stepped on her calculator, cracking its screen. "Please be careful," Maya said. "Those are my school materials." "Should have thought about that before you decided to steal," Mercer replied, appending her lunch container. Her sandwich and apple fell out, rolling across the dirty floor. The security guard finally looked at Maya, taking in her school uniform and frightened expression. Something in his face softened. "Maybe we should review the footage," he suggested, turning to one of the monitors. "We know what we saw," Wilson cut him off. "Just start the paperwork." Maya took a deep breath. "I'd like to call my mother now. It's my right to make a phone call." Wilson laughed. "You watch too many TV shows, kid. This isn't a police station yet." "But you're placing me under arrest, aren't you?" Maya asked, remembering her mother's lessons about civil rights. "If I'm under arrest, I have the right to make a call." The officers exchanged glances, seemingly surprised by her knowledge. "Fine," Wilson finally said. "One call. Make it quick." Officer Wilson handed Maya her phone with obvious reluctance. His thick fingers gripped it tightly before releasing it to her still cuffed hands. "Make it quick, and put it on speaker," he demanded. "No funny business." Maya's fingers trembled as she navigated to her contacts. Finding Mom in her favorites, she pressed the call button and waited. The phone rang 3 times, each ring stretching like an eternity in the small security office. "Maya, is everything okay?" Her mother's voice came through clearly on the 4th ring. Judge Katherine Johnson always answered calls from her daughter, even during court recesses. "Mom," Maya started, her voice cracking slightly. She took a deep breath, determined not to cry. "I'm at Westfield Mall. I'm being detained by police officers who think I stole something, but I didn't. They won't look at the security footage, and they've handcuffed me." There was a brief silence on the other end. When Judge Johnson spoke again, her voice had changed. Gone was the warm, motherly tone, replaced by something calm, measured, and unmistakably authoritative. "I see. And what exactly do they claim you stole?" "A scarf, a blue silk scarf from Harrington's. I was looking at it as a birthday gift for you, but I never put it in my bag. I didn't even walk away from the display with it." Officer Mercer snorted. "A likely story." Judge Johnson heard the comment. "Am I on speakerphone?" "Yes, ma'am," Wilson answered. "Standard procedure." "I see. And whom am I addressing?" "Officer Wilson, ma'am. With me is Officer Mercer and the mall security guard, Mr. Peterson." "Thank you, Officer Wilson. Now, has my daughter been formally charged with anything?" Wilson cleared his throat. "Not yet, ma'am. We're investigating a reported theft." "And has anyone checked the security footage to verify this reported theft?" "We have witnesses, ma'am." Maya noticed how her mother's simple questions were making the officers uncomfortable. Even Mr. Peterson, the security guard, looked increasingly uneasy. "That doesn't answer my question, Officer Wilson. Has anyone reviewed the security footage from the store?" "We were about to," the security guard began, but Wilson cut him off. "We're handling this by the book, ma'am." Judge Johnson's voice remained perfectly steady. "I'm on my way there now. I expect my daughter to be treated with respect and according to proper procedure until I arrive. That includes removing those handcuffs unless you have formally charged her with a crime." Officer Mercer stepped forward. "Ma'am, we can't have family members interfering with police business." "I assure you, Officer Mercer, I have no intention of interfering with proper police procedure. I simply wish to ensure that proper police procedure is being followed. I'll be there in 15 minutes. The call ended. Maya looked up at the officers, who seemed annoyed but also slightly concerned. "Your mom sounds like a lawyer," Wilson said, suspicious. Maya said nothing, remembering her mother's advice. When in doubt, say less. Take the cuffs off, the security guard said suddenly. She's just a kid. We haven't found anything yet. Wilson hesitated, then reluctantly removed the handcuffs. Maya rubbed her wrists where the metal had dug into her skin. Don't get comfortable, Mercer warned. We still need to finish our investigation. Maya sat quietly, watching the clock on the wall. 13 minutes later, footsteps approached the security office. The door opened, and Katherine Johnson entered the room. She wore a navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a tight bun. Gold earrings caught the fluorescent light. She carried herself with unmistakable authority, her eyes quickly taking in every detail of the scene. Maya, she said calmly, going to her daughter first. Are you all right? Maya nodded, relief washing over her as her mother's familiar perfume enveloped her. Katherine turned to face the officers. Now, she said, her voice level but with steel beneath it, I'd like to understand exactly what's happening here. Neither officer realized yet just how much trouble they were in. Katherine Johnson stood in the doorway of the security office, her presence immediately filling the small room. Though not particularly tall, she carried herself with such natural authority that everyone instinctively straightened their posture. Her eyes, the same deep brown as Maya's, swept across the scattered contents of her daughter's backpack on the floor. I asked a question, Katherine said, her voice calm but firm. What exactly is happening here? Officer Wilson stepped forward, assuming a professional tone that contrasted sharply with how he had spoken to Maya. Ma'am, we received a report from store staff that your daughter was seen concealing merchandise. When questioned, she became uncooperative. Maya opened her mouth to protest, but Katherine gave her a subtle hand signal they had used since Maya was small, a gentle palm down that meant wait. I see, Katherine replied, setting her leather briefcase on the table. And what evidence do you have of this alleged theft? We have a staff report, ma'am. Officer Mercer jumped in, and store inventory shows a missing scarf. Katherine nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Peterson, she addressed the security guard directly. I assume this office has access to the store's security camera footage. The security guard shifted uncomfortably. Yes, ma'am. We do. Then I'd like to see the footage of my daughter allegedly concealing merchandise. Wilson stepped between Katherine and the monitors. Ma'am, we're conducting an active investigation here. We appreciate your concern as a parent, but... Let me be clear, Katherine interrupted, her voice dropping slightly. I'm not asking as a concerned parent, though I certainly am that. I'm asking as someone who understands proper police procedure and evidence collection. Something in her tone made Wilson pause. Who exactly are you, ma'am? He asked, suddenly cautious. Katherine reached into her jacket pocket and removed a small leather wallet. She flipped it open to reveal an identification card. Judge Katherine Johnson, 7th District Court. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. The security guard's eyes widened. Officer Mercer took an involuntary step back. Officer Wilson's face remained frozen in a professional mask, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. We weren't aware, Wilson stammered. Clearly, Katherine replied. Now, Mr. Peterson, the security footage, please. This time, no one objected. The security guard quickly turned to his computer and pulled up the footage from Harrington's department store. He rewound to 20 minutes before Maya's detention. The video clearly showed Maya browsing the scarf section. It showed her picking up the blue silk scarf, checking the price tag, and carefully placing it back on the display. The footage continued as she moved to another section, the scarf still visible on the display. There, Katherine pointed. Now show me who reported the theft. Peterson fast-forwarded slightly to show a store clerk approaching the scarf display after Maya had moved away. The clerk picked up the same blue scarf, looked in Maya's direction, then walked away with it. Interesting, Katherine said. Now, please show me the footage of my daughter being detained. The video showed the officers approaching Maya without observing her actions first, without speaking to store personnel on camera, and without checking the merchandise display. Officer Wilson, Katherine said after watching the complete footage, would you please explain why my daughter was handcuffed and paraded through a public mall for a theft that clearly never occurred? Wilson's face had grown increasingly pale. There appears to have been some miscommunication with store staff. Miscommunication? Catherine repeated. Or assumption? Tell me, officers, how many white teenage shoppers did you handcuff today based on miscommunication? The silence in the room was deafening. I thought so, Catherine said, helping Maya gather her scattered belongings. We'll be filing a formal complaint with your department. Mr. Peterson, I'll need copies of this footage sent to my office immediately. As they prepared to leave, Catherine placed a protective arm around Maya's shoulders. And officers? She added, turning back. This isn't over. The security office grew uncomfortably warm as Judge Johnson stared at the two officers. Maya had never seen her mother this angry before, though Catherine's face remained perfectly composed. Years of courtroom experience had taught her to control her emotions, showing only what she wanted others to see. Before we proceed further, Catherine said, opening her briefcase, I'd like to formally introduce myself. She removed a business card and placed it on the table. Judge Catherine Johnson, Presiding Judge of the 7th District Court. Officer Wilson picked up the card, his fingers slightly trembling. Judge Johnson, he repeated, recognition finally dawning on his face. You're the one handling the police department review cases. That's correct. Catherine confirmed. Our court is currently overseeing the department's practices following several complaints about racial profiling. She paused meaningfully, much like what appears to have happened here today. Officer Mercer's face flushed red. Your Honor, this isn't what it looks like. Catherine raised her hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Officer Mercer, I advise you to choose your next words very carefully. The security footage we just watched tells a clear story. She turned to the security guard. Mr. Peterson, could you please replay the section where my daughter placed the scarf back on the display, and then show us who removed it afterward? Peterson nodded quickly, rewinding the footage. The video clearly showed Maya returning the scarf and a store employee, a young white woman with a name tag reading Sarah, removing it minutes later. Now, Catherine continued, please show us footage of any other customers you detained today. Peterson looked uncomfortable. There weren't any others, Your Honor. I see. And how many customers would you estimate have been in Harrington's today? Hundreds, ma'am. It's our busiest day. Catherine nodded. And yet my daughter was the only one detained. The only African-American teenage girl in a school uniform who was looking at an expensive item. Officer Wilson shifted his weight. Judge Johnson, we were simply responding to a report. Let's examine that report. Catherine interrupted. Who made it? Was it this Sarah? And why wasn't a manager consulted before calling the police? Why weren't you instructed to check the security footage before detaining a minor? The officers exchanged nervous glances. Furthermore, Catherine continued, my daughter was handcuffed without being formally charged, paraded through a public space to maximize her humiliation, denied her right to call a parent immediately, and had her personal property carelessly damaged. She pointed to Maya's cracked calculator on the floor. For the first time, Maya saw Officer Wilson look genuinely concerned. Your Honor, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. No, Officer Wilson, this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a textbook example of racial profiling, followed by procedural violations that would not stand up to any judicial review. Catherine turned to the store manager who had just arrived, summoned by a panicked call from Peterson. I presume you're the manager, she asked. Yes, ma'am. James Sullivan. The manager looked between Catherine and the officers, trying to gauge the situation. Mr. Sullivan, your employee falsely accused my daughter of theft, and your security system proves it. I'll need her name and the names of all staff involved in this incident. Sullivan paled. Of course, Your Honor. Catherine turned back to the officers. As for you two, I'll be speaking with Chief Roberts today. I expect complete incident reports on my desk Monday morning, with every detail of this encounter included. Officer Wilson couldn't meet her eyes. Yes, Your Honor. And one more thing, Catherine added, her voice dropping to a near whisper. If my daughter experiences any form of retaliation or harassment from your department, I will personally ensure that every aspect of this incident becomes very public, very quickly. The message was clear. This was no ordinary mother they had angered. This was a judge with the power and determination to hold them accountable. The police station buzzed with unusual activity that Monday morning. Chief Roberts had called an emergency meeting with all officers, but only Officers Wilson and Mercer knew the real reason. They sat in the back row of the briefing room, avoiding the curious glances of their colleagues. "Never seen the chief this worked up," whispered Officer Garcia to her partner. "Something big must have happened over the weekend." Chief Roberts entered the room, followed by two people, a stern-looking man in a suit and Judge Katherine Johnson. The room immediately fell silent. "Good morning," Chief Roberts said, his voice tight. "This is Internal Affairs Investigator Thomas Daniels and Judge Katherine Johnson from the 7th District Court. They're here about a serious incident that occurred Saturday at Westfield Mall." Wilson stared at the floor. Mercer nervously tapped his pen against his notepad. "2 days ago," Judge Johnson began, addressing the room, "my 16-year-old daughter was falsely accused of shoplifting, handcuffed, and paraded through a public mall by Officers Wilson and Mercer. She let the words hang in the air. Security footage confirmed she took nothing, yet these officers made no attempt to verify this before detaining her." Murmurs spread through the room. Several officers turned to look at Wilson and Mercer. "This isn't just about my daughter," Judge Johnson continued. "This morning, I reviewed 3 years of arrest records from your department. African-American suspects were 7 times more likely to be handcuffed for nonviolent offenses than white suspects. They were 3 times more likely to be detained without evidence." The Internal Affairs investigator stepped forward. "We're launching a comprehensive review of department practices, beginning with Officers Wilson and Mercer's records." Later that day, Wilson sat across from Investigator Daniels, a thick folder on the desk between them. "Officer Wilson, we found 27 complaints of excessive force or racial bias in your file," Daniels said, opening the folder. "All dismissed without proper investigation." Wilson shifted uncomfortably. "Those complaints weren't substantiated." "Because no one looked into them," Daniels replied. "But we are now. Starting with these." He pushed forward a stack of papers. 9 teenage shoplifting suspects, all black or Hispanic, all handcuffed in public, all eventually released without charges. Wilson's face paled as he recognized the pattern in his own behavior. Across town, at Harrington's department store, a similar reckoning was taking place. The regional manager had flown in from Chicago, and Sarah, the clerk who had falsely reported Maya, sat trembling in the office. "You removed the scarf yourself," the manager said, replaying the security footage. "Then reported a black teenager for stealing it. Explain that to me." Sarah couldn't meet his eyes. "I thought she looked suspicious." "Because she was black?" the manager asked directly. Sarah's silence was answer enough. The next day, Maya returned home from school to find her mother sitting at the kitchen table with a man in a suit. "Maya, this is Mr. Phillips from the ACLU," Catherine explained. "He'd like to talk to you about what happened." Mr. Phillips smiled kindly. "Your mother filed a formal complaint, and the department has already responded. Officer Wilson has been suspended pending investigation, and Officer Mercer is on desk duty with mandatory sensitivity training." "What about the store?" Maya asked quietly. "Harrington's has issued a public apology and fired the employee who falsely accused you. They're also implementing new security protocols and anti-bias training for all staff." Maya nodded slowly, processing the information. "There's something else?" her mother added. "Mr. Phillips thinks your case could help other young people who've experienced similar treatment but don't have a judge for a mother." "How?" Maya asked. "We'd like to include your experience in a class action lawsuit against the department," Mr. Phillips explained. "It would mean speaking publicly about what happened." Maya thought about the humiliation she'd felt walking through the mall in handcuffs. Then she thought about other kids who might be going through the same thing right now. "I'll do it," she said firmly. "I want to help make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else." Catherine squeezed her daughter's hand, pride shining in her eyes. 6 months had passed since that fateful day at Westfield Mall. Maya Johnson stood at a podium in the community center, facing an audience of over 200 people. Her mother, Judge Katherine, sat in the front row, along with Chief Roberts and several officers from the police department. "My name is Maya Johnson," she began, her voice clear and confident. Last year, I was falsely accused of stealing a scarf. I was handcuffed, humiliated, and treated like a criminal because of the color of my skin. The room was silent as Maya told her story. She described the fear she felt when the officers approached her, the shame of being paraded through the mall in handcuffs, and the anger when they refused to check the security footage that would have proven her innocence. But my story doesn't end with injustice, Maya continued. Because of my mother's position as a judge, I had help that many others don't. Today, I want to talk about what has changed and what still needs to change. Behind Maya, a large screen displayed newspaper headlines. Police Department overhauls detention policies. Store chain implements anti-bias training. Officer fired after pattern of racial profiling uncovered. The class action lawsuit had gained national attention. Officer Wilson had been terminated after the investigation revealed a long history of racial bias. Officer Mercer had been suspended for 3 months and required to complete extensive training before returning to duty. He now worked in community outreach and had personally apologized to Maya. The changes in our city are just beginning, Maya had explained. All officers now must review evidence before detaining suspects for nonviolent offenses. Body cameras must remain on during all civilian interactions. And most importantly, the department has created a civilian review board with real power to investigate complaints. Chief Roberts nodded from his seat. The changes had been difficult, but necessary. The department's relationship with the community was slowly improving. Harrington's and 5 other major retailers have also changed their practices, Maya continued. Security staff now receive regular training on implicit bias. Managers must review footage before contacting police, and they've hired more diverse staff at all levels. Sarah, the clerk who had falsely accused Maya, had been fired. But the problem went beyond one person. The entire system needed fixing. This isn't just about policies, Maya said, her voice growing passionate. It's about seeing people as people, not as stereotypes. It's about questioning our assumptions before acting on them. In the audience, several teenagers nodded. Many had shared similar experiences during community meetings that followed Maya's case. I'm 17 now, Maya said, and this experience has shaped what I want to do with my life. Next year, I'll be studying pre-law at Howard University. I want to become a civil rights attorney, like the ones who helped me. Judge Catherine wiped a tear from her eye, proud of her daughter's strength and determination. As Maya concluded her speech, she looked directly at the police officers present. I don't want fewer police. I want better policing. I don't want stores without security. I want security without bias. And I believe we can get there, but only if we work together. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Maya had become a voice for change in her community, turning her painful experience into a catalyst for progress. After the event, a young black girl approached Maya with her mother. I saw what happened to you on the news, the girl said shyly. The same thing happened to me at a different store, and nobody believed me. Maya knelt down to the girl's level. I believe you, and things are going to be different now. As they walked home that evening, Catherine put her arm around her daughter's shoulders. You know, she said softly, when I became a judge, I hoped to change the system from the inside, but sometimes it takes someone brave enough to challenge it from the outside. I'm so proud of you, Maya. Maya smiled. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready. From a single injustice had come the beginning of real change, and Maya Johnson was just getting started.